Thank you for joining Identity Unplugged podcast. My name is Axai Desai. I'm the CEO and founder of Observe ID and your host for today's podcast. My today's guest is Chandragupta Gudena. Chandra, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Akshay. Thank you for having me. And I'm really excited to talk about identity and just broadly about how things are going on in terms of the security as well as the technology arena. So I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, I think we're looking forward to having these conversations and learn from you, and hopefully our audience will learn something additional as well. Before we get started, Chandra, can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, so again, Chandragupta Gudena, but Chandra for simpler pronunciation. I'm the Chief Information Officer for PBMares. PBMares is a wealth management and CPA accounting firm. We are based in the East Coast. We are one of the top 100 firms, and it's an exciting time for us in the financial services arena, as well as with everything that's going on in technology. So my background, however, has been in management consulting. I have been in different operational roles as well. So this is kind of in the CIO strategy type of a role at PBMares now.
Nice. Excellent. So Chandra, I think we'll start with one of the today's buzzword, which has now become a reality, obviously, with the digital transformations. Everyone you talk to, digital transformation is the core of the conversations that we have with our prospect, our customers, any thought leaders in the industries. What is your opinion about digital transformations, and what do you think where the industry is headed to?
That's a really good question, Akshay, and I think that's a very broad question also, right? So digital transformation has been a pretty high ranked topic for quite some time now. Pre-COVID and post-COVID and during COVID, there has been different levels of digital transformation and adoption going on across different verticals, across the horizontal, so on and so forth, in multiple domains and multiple industries as well. Oftentimes, what I have seen when organizations talk about digital transformation is they split the words digital and transformation, right? So many times you just get hung on to the digital part, which is really just one part of it. And the transformation word is usually not given much attention to. And what that leads to is not having clarity in terms of what the transformation's outcome should look like eventually, so on and so forth. One of the things is, and I think McKinsey had a study on this one, that they talked about digital transformation creates an abundance of things, like an abundance of data. So all of a sudden you never had this data and you have this big, massive pile of data now. What do you do with that? What does it do to your resources that now have to think about it from a digital literacy standpoint? So there are those kinds of things that come together for digital transformation. And I think there's a metric floating around that says something like 70 to 75% of digital transformation initiatives end up failing. But almost every organization has to go through digital transformation in order to remain sustainable and make sure you're able to go forward, so on and so forth. I think what I'm seeing more and more is the notion or the ability to start a project is very easy with digital transformation. It's very, very hard to kill a project. And I think that model needs to be flipped a little bit. As we go more and more into the future, digital transformation will still continue to be there. And the transformation part will now have a more accelerated movement with all the latest technologies and with AI, generative AI and robotic process automation and dashboards and all kinds of things which we talk about every day. Those will lead to accelerated decision making. But the pitfall I see is going to be wastage in terms of efforts and dollars and creation of unnecessary churn, which is where an organization should pay a lot of attention to as part of the digital transformation journey itself. Digital transformation will always give an organization competitive advantage depending on the type of transformation they're choosing. For example, I have seen firms that accelerate their idea to market from a 2-year time period to a matter of a few weeks, right? So that's a pretty significant cut down in terms of time to market for your products or services, so on and so forth. I've seen organizations where we have had clients as well as organizations where you are waiting on data and information for months and weeks. But as you go along this journey, that has been brought down to a couple of clicks and a few minutes just because of a backbone of enterprise data warehouse and things like that that we have put in place. PBMares is a great example of that, where such kind of infrastructure enhancements and transformation that is needed for decision making, for focusing on the client success, for focusing on client growth, so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great response, right, Chandra? So obviously, you're talking about the operational efficiency. At the same time, you're talking about some of the wastage that occurs as a part of these project initiations. What about the security? Are you concerned about security at all? And how do you address, I mean, PBMares being a financial institute, obviously, I'm sure that is on top of your mind. So how do you address the security issues?
Yes, and that's a great point, Akshay. I intentionally didn't touch on security because I figured it might come up in our future dialogue.
Sure.
But security is, again, a big part of the digital transformation, right? So if you think about the example of the abundance of data that's coming up, we have to secure that data too. A lot of times what we have seen, and I think there have been some analysis by maybe IDG or IBM that basically have talked about almost 80 or 90% of the data that we sit on digitally today is unstructured. And even worse, about 60 or so percent of data that we have in different files and folders, we don't even know what that content is. So you just imagine the security ramifications of not even knowing that may be confidential, that may not be confidential. As a result, we have to take a very different approach to security now. Back in the day, prior to digital transformation, prior to cloud strategy and cloud adoption, so on and so forth, we always used to think about it as a sanitized environment, right? So you have your defense in depth, you have your multiple layers. Once you go through all of those layers, you get to a certain point and you have access to everything in that area. With our current environment, that's not possible. The abundance of data, the multiple tenancies as a result of cloud transformations, the multiple areas in terms of how people are going to access that information to get the job done, it's all very distributed. So security does take a pretty big leap in terms of how it was planned in the past to the future architecture and the current architecture. That has to really depend on elasticity of that security. It has to be really minute and detailed, at the same time extremely scalable across multiple tenancies.
Absolutely. I think that's very well said. So how do you address? I mean, obviously, these are all the security concerns. There are lots and lots of security concerns that you just highlighted. What are some of the steps you, as a leader of the financial institutes, are you taking to address some of these concerns?
So there's multiple schools of thought in terms of how you approach it. Some would follow a regulatory compliance mechanism where you have a certain compliance and you just go through that. In other areas, you basically go by a certain framework or something like that. So, I mean, a lot of times SOC 2 Type 1, SOC 2 Type 2, those are compliance-based. The ISO frameworks, 27001, 27002, those are really good frameworks. But beyond all of these, having an understanding of what data are we working with as a business and which regulation impacts that data, and then picking the framework to suit that environment is very important. Holistically, at a 60,000 foot level, it is the basic framework of tenancies that we follow, which is confidentiality, integrity, availability, right? So those three things have to be maintained. Security in the past versus security in the current and future is definitely shifting in terms of how we are approaching it. So what we are doing is we are thinking about it in terms of identity management. We are thinking about it in terms of zero trust. We are thinking about it in terms of data at rest, data in motion, security controls, whether it's encryption platforms. I mean, you name it, there's an entire slew of things that we can think of. But those are all the various mechanisms through which we are addressing security. The major shift, however, is moving away from trust everything in this area to trust nothing anywhere, right? So that is the biggest shift that we have experienced from then to now.
Yeah, I mean, that's essentially classifying the data, ensure the right people have access to the right people, making sure that the identities or the users have just the right access to the right information at the right time, and not all the time, I guess. There are terminologies that usually use just-in-time access, so providing the access just for the period of the time that they really need to use it and not all the time. I mean, these are great points that you're highlighting. Obviously, security is not a one thing. I think there are slew of things that you need to take into considerations before you can address an end-to-end security within an organization. I heard you talk about the zero trust. What is your understanding of zero trust? I mean, again, it used to be a buzzword. I think it has become reality, in my opinion, nowadays. Every organization is looking to implement a zero trust. If there are other CIOs who are looking for some help in this aspect, where do they start with? I mean, what is zero trust and where do you start with?
So what I would definitely say, Akshay, is zero trust is a significant paradigm shift in terms of how you approach security, right? So going back to the notion of your defense in depth, you go through your different layers. At a certain layer, you have certain trust, and everything in that environment is already trusted. Take all of that out and say, we don't trust anything, right? So trust some things to trust nothing. That's basically zero trust, where we are going with it. But to keep it in context, most CIOs that I'm talking to and my peers and my colleagues and so on and so forth, what we are seeing is still this three-way approach to things, right? So in a zero trust environment, you trust nothing.
Right.
And what becomes very critical at that point is the identity, because the identity is made up of your footprint and your fingerprint. In a layman's terms, the fingerprint basically gives you access to different things that you're authorized to use. The footprint authorizes you to go to different places, right? So it's in our traditional world, we think about authentication and authorization, so on and so forth. Where zero trust comes in is the infrastructure has to be built around that now. It's no longer a VPN where you're doing a tunnel and you're going forward with it. It's a combination of a zero trust environment where none of the devices, none of the identities trust each other, combined with authorizing and authenticating using a centralized identity management environment, which will include MFA, multi-factor authentication, and things like that, and combine that along with your encryption platforms and your security and all things related to data security, detection, so on and so forth. So it is going to be a multi-layered approach to it. But as you were talking, right, so zero trust is definitely not something that should be taken directly and put. It's a change that you have to work with. It is a complete re-architecting of your entire infrastructure before you go to zero trust.
Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree. I hear you keep talking about do not trust. I think that seems like the core components of do not trust, and then ensure that the right amount of privileges and right amount of access has been given to everyone. I think that completely makes sense. I think what I wanted to find out, and I'm sure that is a question in everyone's mind, is in order to accomplish, I mean, what is important to you? Is it observability is important to you? Is it the automatic remediation that helps you accomplish that? I mean, what are some of the components that you think would be ideal in order to help implement this?
So in a zero trust model, you still have your basic authentication.
Mm-hmm.
You have your verification. So you have to validate and verify who you are. And you have to continuously monitor. So observability comes at that particular step, where you're monitoring and making sure that you are who you are, your authorizations and access controls meet exactly what has been defined, whether it's through your roles, responsibilities, where are you authorized to go, so on and so forth, right? Now, beyond that, zero trust gives you like a SIM type of an environment, right? A security information, event management type of an environment as well. But from an identity standpoint, that you need these audit trails that can feed into a framework like that. That's where observability comes in. That's where a single pane of view in terms of which identity has access to what kinds of things comes in. Because again, the trust is not across a domain. The trust is more between a point to point at this point of time.
Yeah, very well. Yeah. So, I mean, you are obviously CIO. So what are some of your top priorities? I mean, given the fact that there are constant change, obviously pandemic has kind of shifted a lot of things as well, with the remote workforce, involvement of remote workforce, as well as the faster migrations to cloud. What are some of your top priorities for 2024 and beyond? organization?
I'll stick with a very non-technical response here, Akshay, because I think as CIOs, as chief information officers, or even as CTOs or anyone in the C-suite, as a leader, you should not think about just technology, right?
Yeah.
So I have top 5 priorities for me. Number 1 is client growth and client success. That is one of my top priorities. The second one is development and enabling the developing of new and upgraded services for the benefit of our clients. The third one is operational efficiency. How can we use automation to reduce the workload? How can we use technology to make it more seamless integration across the board? These are all things that relate to effective operations and operational efficiency. Number 4 is about, and we as a firm predominantly grow through mergers and acquisitions. So standardization is very important to us. So when we go through a merger and acquisition, how do we make sure we standardize, accelerate that integration? And the 5th, and again, these are not in any order of priority. These are sort of top 5 priorities. They all share similar level of weightage, is really around scalable security that should enable organizational agility, right? So you can have the most secure environment and a highly inefficient and very slow to move and workflow is constrained, so on and so forth type of an environment. The challenge is here, how do you balance security to be scalable while keeping the organization agile? And a big part of this, Akshay, across all of these priorities is digital literacy. So today we talk of digital literacy in very open and broad terms, but the rate at which technology is changing, the rate at which the business goals are changing, that digital literacy needs to be at a very different level. It's no longer just about how to use technology, it's about how do I enable technology to solve my business problem. And you don't need an IT team to tell you that. That should be commoditized at an individual level to help in a self-service manner solve the problem.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's true. I heard you talking about the automations a couple of times, Chandra, and increasing the operational efficiency. I assume that one of the things also the automation brings in is obviously the fact that it avoids a human error, right? So it becomes a repetitive process at the end of the day and helps avoid any kind of human errors. And then also helps from a security standpoint of view, I assume. Is that fair?
It is fair, but there are some pitfalls that you have to be careful about with automation, right? So the pitfalls are things like, if you take a process that has got, say, 1x error in it and you automate it, that 0.1x error can become 4x error. It really exacerbates the issue when you automate something that has already some level of manual faultiness associated with it, right? So you have to be very careful with those automations. The other area with automations, which usually has the conflict with, is security.
Yeah.
APIs are a great way to connect these systems and have them talk to one another so that it looks seamless to the end user, so on and so forth. But imagine that, and I think there was a study also done where compromising an identity versus compromising an API gave you a bigger bang for the buck. I mean, you compromise the API, you compromise 2 different systems altogether. You have not compromised a single identity. So the security ramifications and the care that is needed is also very important. Things like RPA, automation engines, and so on and so forth are really good when you want to just mimic a human behavior up to a certain number of steps. And beyond that, you still need the human in the loop to finish those things. What I've also seen with automation is it's really great to improve efficiencies, but it typically has a lifespan of 2 years. So within 2 years of an automation being in place, it starts rolling itself into a technology debt. And that debt is a result of baseline features in a program that you're already using, or a change in the workflow or a business process. And those things will automatically make that automation obsolete. So investment into automation is also a big headache sometimes, because if you're investing heavily for a 5-year time period, you have to be prepared to count it as a technology debt in 2.5 years.
Sure. Yeah. No, absolutely. I completely agree with you, Chandra. So, one last question, and this is a typical we ask every guest. You have been a CIO for, as far as I believe, at least for the 8 years or maybe even longer than that. So what advice would you give based on your journey and your experience to the aspiring chief information officer?
I would say be a student of the industry, right? So wherever you are, be a student of that domain, be a student of that industry. Try to become a partner to your colleagues and to your stakeholders and to your C-suite. And a lot of times CIOs may be seen as, hey, they're these technology people, right? They just talk technology. And understanding what technology leads to from a change management perspective is very important. And what that amounts to is listen very carefully, right? Listen when you're in a meeting, listen to the words that are not being said. You have to absorb them, digest them, and think about how do you solve this problem more globally. Don't try to solve individual problems. So as a result, what I think about the upcoming generation is that, take on the hat of a problem solver. Pick a problem, try to solve it in more than one way, and see how it'll end up changing lives or changing experience, so on and so forth. Try to be a business advisor. And to be a business advisor, you have to be a student of that domain. So that's where constantly researching and getting up to speed is important. The other thing I always get a lot is, hey, you're the CIO, you're in technology, so you should know this.
Right.
The short answer is no, I don't. And I try to keep up. Everyone tries to keep up. But at the same time, it's okay to say I don't know. The bigger question I would ask there is, what problem are you trying to solve? And that's where a clear problem statement is important. How are you connecting your initiatives, your projects, your operation to achieving the strategic objectives of the firm? What is the North Star of the company, where you're trying to connect all of those things to that North Star, right? So this is where the partnership comes in. And I think bottom line is just listen, read up, be a good partner, and be very flexible in terms of change and churn that can happen as a result of technology.
Yeah, I mean, very well said. So be a good business partner, continue to research, continue to educate yourself, be aware of the trends that are happening in the industries. I think those are some of the points you highlighted. That's really great advice. And Chandra, thank you. I think that's the only time that we have for today. So we appreciate your time. I'm sure there's a lot more that we can talk. We'll try to bring you again some other day and have another informative conversations, but we truly appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Akshay. Thank you for having me, and it was great catching up.
Thank you.